Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's me, your guide from the dark side, Dawson Richard. How is everyone today on this beautiful Wednesday morning? It is very rainy here, kind of sets the mood for these kind of things. I love when it rains, and I do this podcast because it just kind of gives this very creepy vibe to everything. Speaking of the uploads, I like the rhythm that I've got going. I've tried to do like a real case and then something more paranormal. So that way it's not like two serial killers in a row, because while cults and murderers are interesting, I also want to highlight paranormal stuff. So that way I've got kind of a large spanning series of paranormal things mixed in with the gritty murders and the serial killers. So yeah, if you were squeamish around gore, murder, and other heinous acts of violence, please back out now. So, for today's episode, we will look at 4 of the most haunted hospitals and asylums in the United States. I figured this was a fitting topic with all the coronavirus stuff going around, so maybe this episode can help take your mind off of it or give you something to listen to if you're social distancing or if you're in quarantine. So, I know that there are more hospitals than the ones that I'm going to mention here, but I tried to pick out some of the spookiest and coolest, so I might do some of the other hospitals in like a follow-up episode, but we'll focus on that later. Right now, we got some ghosts and shit to uncover, so dim the lights and listen in close, because here we go. Our first haunted hospital is Waverly Hills Sanatorium. During the 1800s and early 1900s, America was being plagued by a disease known as the White Death, or by its more common name, tuberculosis. At the time, there was no known cure, and many families fell victim to it. In 1900, Louisville, Kentucky had one of the highest tuberculosis death rates in America, most likely due to the many wetlands around the Ohio River. In 1910, a hospital was constructed on a windswept hill in southern Jefferson County that had been designed specifically to combat this horrific disease. The new structure, known as Waverly Hills, was officially opened years later in 1926. Sanatoriums were built on high hills surrounded by peaceful woods to create a serene atmosphere to help the patients recover. It was considered the most advanced tuberculosis sanatorium in the country. Waverly Hills was a self-contained community, a city in and of itself, complete with its own zip code. It also had its own post office, water treatment facility, grew its own fruits and vegetables, raised its own meat for slaughter, and maintained many of the other necessities of everyday life. Everyone at Waverly, patients, nurses, doctors, and other employees, had to say goodbye to everything they knew on the outside world. Once you went to Waverly Hills, you became a permanent resident on the hill. Since there was no cure for tuberculosis at the time, patients were offered rest, fresh air, and lots of nutritious food. Sadly, the main use for the hospital wasn't so much to aid those within, but to ensure that they didn't infect the rest of the populace. Families were tragically divided, with parents and even children being separated. But the treatments for tuberculosis were sometimes just as bad as the disease itself. Some of the experiments that were conducted are terrible to even think about. Patients' lungs were exposed to ultraviolet light to try and stop the spread of bacteria. This was done in sunrooms using artificial light in place of sunlight, or on the roof or open porches of the hospital. Since fresh air was thought to also be a possible cure, patients were often placed in front of huge windows or on the open porches no matter what the season. Old photographs would show patients lounging in chairs taking in the fresh air while literally covered from head to toe in snow. Other treatments were less pleasant and much, much bloodier. Balloons would be surgically implanted into the lungs and then filled with air to expand them. Needless to say, this often had disastrous results, as did an operation where muscles and ribs were removed from a patient's chest to allow the lungs to expand further and let in more oxygen. This blood-soaked procedure was seen as a last resort, and many patients didn't survive. The worst time for deaths at Waverly was shortly after World War II, when many soldiers were coming home from war and being sent to Waverly for treatment. Many times these soldiers were so far along into the sickness that they would die weeks later. After the introduction of streptomycin in 1943, the number of tuberculosis cases gradually lowered until there was no longer need for such a large hospital. The remaining patients were sent to Hazelwood Sanatorium in Louisville. Researchers suggest that since 162 people died at Waverly Hills in 1945, the highest total number of deaths possible over 50 years was approximately 8,202. Waverly Hills closed in June 1961. With that much death in such a small space, there's no doubt bound to be some wicked energy lingering on the grounds of Waverly. It is considered to be the most haunted building in the eastern United States. Eyewitness accounts talk of all the usual paranormal activity: footsteps, disembodied voices, flickering lights, doors that slam on their own, and shadowy figures that crawl through the halls have all been reported. One of the more popular stories of Waverly's ghostly entities involves the spirit of a small boy named Timmy. Timmy was supposedly a kid who died at Waverly while only 6 or 7. Rumor has it that if you bring a ball and roll it down the hall, the ball will come back to you. There's even a video out there of a man capturing this bizarre event. All you have to do is go to YouTube, look up Waverly Hills Timmy ball, and it should pop up. And skeptics have said things like, oh, the floor is uneven, or there's a draft, which is like, man, people will try to disprove anything. Like, I swear. Another creepy legend from Waverly involves a pregnant nurse who allegedly committed suicide in room 502. Some tales claim that a doctor impregnated the nurse and then wanted nothing to do with her. Devastated, the woman hung herself from an exposed pipe or light fixture. Other versions claim it was the hospital's owner who impregnated the woman, and that she jumped from the room rather than hanging herself. It's unknown how long that she may have been hanging in this room before her body was discovered. Regardless of which tale you believe, many Waverly visitors are convinced that an anguished entity lurks in room 502. During the tour, pregnant women are advised to stay away from the room, as other women have admitted to feeling dizzy or uncomfortable in the room itself. One of Waverly's creepiest entities is a presence known only as the Creeper. The Creeper is a dark, terrifying entity that crawls along the floors and the walls of Waverly Hills. Some believe it is an otherworldly spirit or even a demonic force, while others believe it is the spirit of a man named George that has been twisted and misformed by the trauma of death. Tour guides at Waverly have also reported seeing doppelgangers, also known as double walkers, that are a type of spirit that can mimic the appearance, voice, and mannerisms of anyone or anything that they encounter. This could mean looking across the room and seeing an exact replica of yourself. Tour guides at Waverly Hills have reported seeing doppelgangers of themselves and of others. In some cases, the doppelgangers were almost identical, except for black holes where their eyes should be. One of the sadder ghost stories from Waverly is that of an elderly woman who supposedly roams the hospital, moaning and bleeding from her chained hands and feet. Though she cries for help when you approach her, she runs away screaming in terror. Finally, and most disturbing, is what was referred to as the body chute, or the death tunnel. With so many deaths at Waverly, there had to be some way to dispose of the bodies. The doctors believed that seeing so many of their fellow patients depart the sanatorium dead would weigh heavily on their mental state. Therefore, a long concrete tunnel was constructed that led directly out of the hospital. This way, the dead could be transported discreetly out of Waverly. Paranormal investigators have said that this is a hot spot within Waverly, and that the air there is frigid and sinister. There's no telling how many wayward souls are probably tied to the death tunnel as their final resting place. So, I myself have been to Waverly, and I can 100% confirm that it is just weird. Like, something feels off. Even just seeing it from a distance, makes a chill creep up your spine. And around my area, and especially into Louisville, Waverly is a legend. And there are these reports recently that they plan on turning it into a hotel, and I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about that. I always feel like with paranormal hotspots like that, it's just, it's not a good idea. Like, you're asking for trouble. Unless the establishment was like a hotel beforehand, or remains a hotel to this day, but oh well, I guess enjoy bunking with a fucking ghost. For our second hospital, we moved to Spring City, Pennsylvania, where the Pennhurst State School and Asylum, originally called the Eastern Pennsylvania Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, wow, mouthful, sits abandoned but not entirely empty. This facility was authorized for construction in 1903. It was designed as a state-funded and operated facility to house any individual deemed feeble-minded and thus unable to function in normal society. This included physically and mentally disabled persons, individuals with abnormalities, physical or psychological, and mute, deaf, and blind people. This also included those with offensive habits and imperfect speech. And as time went on, the institution would be pressured to also house and hold immigrants, criminals, and orphans. It became this solution for ridding society of what were deemed as undesirables. And just like Waverly, the entire institution was built to be self-sufficient, with the residents completing all the tasks necessary to keep it running. In 1913, legislature created a commission for the care of the feeble-minded, which basically said that disabled individuals were unfit for citizenship and a menace to the peace. It stated that people like this were to be taken into custodial care by the government. This served to keep disabled people away from the general population for everyone's safety, as well as to keep them from reproducing. Like, how fucked up is that? They basically signed off this rule saying that they needed to hide these people away like they were monsters or something, to stick all these imperfect people where the rest of the normal world wouldn't have to look at them. Like, that's disgusting. It's fucked up is what it is. So in the 1960s, Pennhurst was home to 2,791 people. That's 900 more than their maximum capacity. In 1968, a reporter by the name of Bill Baldini did a short TV series on Pennhurst, which was the first that most people had even heard of the institution. The atrocities that Bill uncovered in his set were beyond horrible. Bill and his crew of photographers captured footage of children locked in cages, sitting in their own feces and filth, full-grown hands and feet bound by straps to adult-sized crib beds. Inmates of the institution were shown rocking, pacing, and twitching. Many were severely disabled either mentally or physically, but others were quite lucid and coherent, but withdrawn into themselves because of overstimulation of the senses in the loud and sometimes frightening place, and a lack of much-needed mental stimulation. When one of the young patients was asked by Bill what he would like most in the world if he could have anything he wanted, he said with a sad and withdrawn reply, to get out of Pennhurst Asylum. Apparently, those in positions of power were not only hurting the patients and residents themselves, but also arranging for patients to bully and assault each other. One of the most horrible accounts of abuse came from one of the asylum's physicians known as Dr. Fear, which, with the name like Dr. Fear, like, you know this guy's fucked up. So in the series, he talked about one of his treatments for children who misbehaved by placing them in wards designed for mentally challenged children. By doing so, the patient would feel isolated and ridicule, thus humbling them into submission. It was learned that aside from mental anguish, this would also cause the child to regress mentally. So essentially, when a kid acted up, they would place that child into a ward where they kept mentally handicapped children. And over time, the child would feel degraded and would regress mentally until he fit in with the rest of them there, which is crazy. And Dr. Fear also described how he dealt with a particularly vicious bully who had brutalized one of the other inmates. He described how he had asked one of his colleagues which injection he could use to cause the most discomfort to a patient without permanently injuring him. Then he proceeded to administer that injection to the bully. So with all of this evidence now in the public light, it was only a matter of time before Pennhurst was shut down, right? Wrong. Surprisingly, Pennhurst didn't shut down until 1987, almost 2 decades after the release of this video. Naturally, as with any such institution with a sordid history of human suffering, violence, and death, Pennhurst has its own share of ghostly tales. The following investigations are conducted by members of the Shore Paranormal Research Society, or SPRS, and they believe Pennhurst to be very, very haunted. One of their investigations included the Quaker building, where the team reported numerous shadows manifest and dissipate at will. These shadows include what appeared to be a small female child with long black hair, a hunched-over presence with long dangling arms, and what appeared to be other apparitions peering around doors and windows. Doors and a rocking chair have moved without anyone being near them. One investigator was shoved from behind hard enough on a stairway to leave a deep red mark on the small of his back, while another was scratched on the arm by an unknown object when they were not by anything or close to any walls. Objects are reported being propelled around the basement, such as a pry bar, some sort of brass fixture, and various other unknown objects. There are also multiple EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena, as well as EMF spikes throughout the building when there is no electricity supplied to any building inside. Their psychic medium, Sharon Pugh, has felt multiple energies there, including either a demonic force or a past life that wasn't a very nice person. The team caught many recordings of what sounded like disembodied voices. Among the recordings are the sounds of voices uttering things like, "Go away," "I'll kill you," "We're upset," and "Why did you come here?" An unknown male states, "I'm scared," while an invisible female asks, "Why won't you leave?" I cannot even begin to imagine the amount of tormented souls who probably still wander Penhurst Asylum. The atrocities committed there have no doubt gathered a large amount of tormented souls who still haunt the grounds to this day. Moving on now to the New York town of East Bethany, there is a place that once housed everything from orphans to those afflicted with tuberculosis to the elderly. This place is Rolling Hills Asylum, and it has stood for nearly 2 centuries. On December 4th, 1826, the Genesee County Board of Supervisors met in Bethany for the purpose of establishing a county poorhouse. A poorhouse was a place where you would put orphaned children, families, destitute elderly, physically handicapped, mentally unstable, and even sometimes criminals. These places were built on a poor farm on which able-bodied residents were required to work. There was a brick building, originally a stagecoach tavern, located near the corner of the Bethany Center Road and Raymond Road. This was the site selected to be the new poorhouse. It was originally named the Genesee County Poor Farm, often affectionately referred to as the Old County Home. In 1828, Genesee County constructed a stone building attached to the poorhouse for the confinement of lunatics and a repository for paupers committed for misconduct. The insane were also housed at the county home until 1887, when the Board of Supervisors agreed to send people suffering with acute insanity elsewhere in the state. The Genesee County Poor Farm, aka the county home, was a self-sufficient working farm and woods spanning over 200 acres, providing food and fuel. Thus, the actual cost to care for each person was low, about $1.08 per week per resident. The residents were referred to as inmates, no matter why they were housed there, and those physically able-bodied would work the farm, and many actually built and made wares to sell to help offset some of the living expenses. The raising of Holsteins, pigs, draft horses, chickens, and ducks, canning jams, jellies, meats were all part of the chores. There was a bakery and even a wood shop where coffins were made, for use as needed and for sale to local mortuaries. Over 1,700 bodies are believed to be buried here in unmarked graves, and a plethora of supernatural activity has been reported at the Rolling Hills Asylum, including disembodied voices, doors slamming, footsteps, and full-body apparitions. There are stories of shadow people, ghostly touches, and numerous EVP recordings. One of the ghosts that haunt Rolling Hills is Haiti, who resides on the first floor of the East Wing. Sharon, the owner of Rolling Hills, says she left a tape recorder running in the room and caught the distinct voice of an elderly woman calling out, "Hello." This voice is believed to be the voice of a former patient of the nursing home known as Haiti. She was blind and used to call out hello to get the attention of the nurses. This recording was played for a former employee of the place who said that she was shocked to hear the voice of Haiti again. Roy Krause was a 7-foot tall resident of Rolling Hills. He probably had gigantism caused by a tumor in the pituitary glands, which messes with the growth hormones. He lived out his life at Rolling Hills and died in 1942, almost 7.5 feet tall at the age of 52. His spirit appears to the workers as a 7-foot tall shadow man and is said to be one of the employees' favorites. The owner tells a story about running into a rat in the infirmary about 2 months after moving into Rolling Hills. Terrified, she screamed and ran away from it. The very next day, she found the rat dead on the stairs, blood oozing from its mouth as if its neck had been broken. On the wall above the rat was a giant, bloody handprint. It is believed that the ghost of Roy witnessed her distress and killed the rat for her. In the old men's dormitory is a corridor referred to as the shadow hallway. This is where many of the employees see what they describe as shadow people. Employees have described that while looking down towards the infirmary section, they start to see shadow people that appear in the shape of a normal person. Solid, they can be light gray, medium gray, dark gray, or pitch black. They come in and out of doorways, walk across the hall. Sometimes they'll poke an arm or a leg out, but sometimes they crawl on the floor. It's sad to think that after spending so much of their time here, a lot of the patients, especially those who were orphaned or who had lost family members, would have come to accept the place as their home, as well as the other inmates as their family. So I guess it makes sense that in death they would choose to inhabit the old building. Taunton, Massachusetts, a small town that harbors a dark secret. Nestled along Hodges Avenue is the Taunton State Hospital, formerly known as the State Lunatic Hospital at Taunton. This building was established in 1854, and most of the original part of the facility was built in a unique and rare neoclassical style designed by architects Boyden and Ball. The main purpose of this new mental asylum was to relieve the pressure of a rising patient population from its only facility in Worcester. The large, sprawling campus located on a hill offered fresh air and sunlight, and the complex was expanded in the early 1870s and again between 1887 and 1906. One of the building's most beautiful features was its breezeways, which were added in the 1890s to connect the end of the wards to the hospital's infirmary buildings. At the start of 1900, Taunton was overloaded with the criminally insane. From murderers to rapists to arsonists, any violent psychotic personality you could think of was housed in these buildings, but none so notable as Jane Toppan. Taunton wasn't the first hospital that Jane had spent a lengthy amount of time in, as she was a practicing nurse prior to her conviction and incarceration. However, it's hard to really use the word nurse when you describe her. For Jane, her patients were no more than toys, and the treatments no more than reckless experimentations for curiosity's sake. In the beginning, she would simply toy with their medication levels to see what would happen, but then she started to get better at it. Eventually, Jane's experiments began to fulfill a sexual thrill for her as her tastes evolved into necrophilia. Problem is, you can't just kill all your patients. Not unless you bring them back after you're done with them. So the story of Jane Toppan's activities from her time as a nurse is truly just down to the bone disturbing and weird. Hundreds of patients in her care were intentionally pushed past heart and organ failure, at which point she would proceed to have intercourse with the dead body, and then once she was finished, resuscitate them. And while, yes, she was a nurse and the ability to bring somebody back from that type of situation is, pretty wild, she's still responsible for the deaths of 31 patients who she could not resuscitate. It's almost kind of fitting that Jane would be committed for life to Taunton State Hospital, where the staff were more like her than she knew. Slowly and over the course of Taunton's first few decades, reports began to emerge of abuse and neglect, but people paid little attention to it. It wasn't until a young interning psychiatrist fled the facility and reported what he described as executions being carried out in the basement. But what he didn't realize is that these were not executions at all. They were satanic sacrifices being carried out by the staff. It was said that doctors would drag patients into the basement of the facility and sacrifice them to Satan. The whole truth would never be revealed to the public. In 1975, generations of the cult operating at Taunton's met the end of their free reign when scandal and rumor became uncontrollable, because the governor of Massachusetts ordered the facility closed for good. But search as hard as you can, and you will never find the official explanation for Taunton's closing in 1975. In 1999, the main dome of the administration building collapsed, and in 2006, a large part of the historic complex was destroyed by fire. In 2009, the remaining parts were demolished. However, many of the newer buildings on the campus remain. Shortly after the closing of the facility, stories began to pop up from the employees about strange paranormal happenings in and around the building. The grounds, once cherished and enjoyed, are the subject of many stories. Spirits are said to walk around outside the building, often seen as a mist or dark clouds. Reports also speak of an elderly man crouching and stroking the grass. When approached, he smiles and disappears. Others have seen people in light pants and white shirts. Many of the spirits who wander the grounds are believed to be the former residents. It seems those who sought comfort in the hospital and received it still find their way back. Other ghosts seen on the grounds are not so friendly. In a cemetery on the property, one resident of the hospital had an experience that changed his life. As a juvenile from the area arrested on drug charges, he was serving a stretch of time before leaving for a residential treatment facility. He was able to find a way out of the building and decided to hide in the cemetery to lay low and plan where he would spend the night. As he crouched near a tombstone, he felt cold hands on his shoulder. Thinking that he had been caught by one of the staff members, he raised his arms and turned around. There was no one there, but he heard a faint voice whisper the word, "Leave." He walked back to the building, barely able to breathe, and turned himself in. While the youth fully believed his story to be true, some of the details might have been blurred due to his drug use and the excitement of his escape. Staff members all had the same stories about what happened there. They speak of cold spots that moved with them whenever they were down in the basement where the rituals supposedly took place. Some would see a scuffling shadow or a ball of light that disappeared as if walking through the wall. One staff member saw a fog in the basement and left soon after. "They told me it was my imagination," he said. "It was an old place. The people that actually worked there, worked for a living. Said it was a ghost or something. I saw that smoky man down there twice, and the second time, I quit. It wasn't worth it." One staff member claimed he reached the final step on his way down to the basement only to feel himself stop. He closed his eyes and felt as if he were experiencing the awful things that had happened there in vivid detail. "I heard and saw everything. I could smell the smoke. I heard a drum playing and weird chanting, like devil worshippers." He took a step back and was back on the stairs, and the scene melted away instantly. He quit the next day and still has trouble describing what he saw in detail. "I don't even want to think about it, but I have nightmares. I only tell you what happened because it might make them go away." The evil doesn't stay in the basement, though. Screams are heard from the areas where the electric shock treatments and cold therapies were conducted. Residents have had their lights turn on and off in the middle of the night. The abandoned or burnt-down sections have rooms that are illuminated by light, although there are no working lights in the building. Some have even seen small children and disheveled adults peer down from the places people are not supposed to be in. None of these stories, however, even compare to the Taunton State Hospital's Shadow Man. The Shadow Man lives in the basement, and it's said that he travels through the walls, floors, and ceilings as though Taunton was a body and he was its virus. At times he is not much more than a shadow having no specific form and moving around as if crawling across the wall. Other times he is more solid, although somewhat stretched out. 3 things remain constant in the report, however. His face can never be seen, he is always described as being male, and he appears in the corner of the residence room in the middle of the night, and stands as if watching them. Many believe that the Shadow Man was an entity that tied to the location itself, which would be fine, but now that the building has been demolished, what then? Well, as it turns out, a lot of the original pipes of the structure were auctioned off either for use as a historical item or for actual function. So could it be that the Shadow Man still lives on through these items? We may never know, but one thing is for sure, Taunton State Hospital is a place of evil. So that is it, everybody. The 4 most haunted hospitals in America. I had to take like 5 breaks while recording this to like listen to like some like chill like ukulele music, like some DIY shit, because like it's creepy. Like you read about this stuff and like I'm sure hearing it like, will give you like a different feeling, and me, throwing in all the sound effects and stuff probably gave you more of a spook. But like just sitting here and reading it is just scary. Like you just start hearing things, your mind starts playing tricks on you. I'm telling you, the human mind is like built to just scare the shit out of us. But I find it weird that like all the stories always talk about like shadow people who haunt the hospital. Like it's creepy when stories line up like that, I think. But anyway, what did you all think? Did you enjoy this little paranormal segment? I always enjoy talking about paranormal ghost stuff. And since this was my first real ghost episode, I'm super pumped to do some more for you guys. Anyway, thanks again for joining me. It has been a blast. And don't forget to tune in next week, where we will talk about one of Tennessee's most famous scary stories, the Bell Witch. Thanks for listening. Keep away from haunted hospitals and stay weird, everybody.